The Young and the Restless spoilers. There comes a moment when silence becomes heavier than confession, when the weight of what is hidden begins to suffocate the heart that carries it. For Sienna, that moment had finally arrived. For weeks she had pretended that the world she built was stable, that the love she shared with Noah was something pure and untouched, a sanctuary amid the chaos of Genoa City. Yet behind her carefully painted serenity, the truth rotted like something left too long in the dark. She could not hold it in any longer. The secret that had burned through her every thought was ready to consume her from within, and once she spoke it aloud, nothing, not her love, not her future, not even her sanity, would remain the same. She had gone to Noah because she needed shelter, but that was not the full story. The reason she sought him out was far more tangled, a web spun out of desperation, guilt, and the haunting awareness that someone else was always watching from the shadows. She wanted to believe that love could erase the stains of her past, but the truth was that her past was still alive, whispering, crawling, and now it demanded to be acknowledged. When Sienna realized she was pregnant, she had convinced herself that Noah would be the answer to every question she feared to ask. He was kind, gentle, almost naive in his affection, and he looked at her as though she were something fragile worth protecting. In his eyes, she found the illusion of safety. But illusions have a cruel way of dissolving when truth pierces through. The life inside her was not the symbol of their union she claimed it to be. It was a question mark, a biological mystery tied to nights she could no longer clearly remember, to faces that blurred in the shadows of guilt and deceit. Noah believed without hesitation that he was the father. He built dreams around that belief, of redemption, of a new beginning, of being the man who finally made Sienna whole. Yet as he dreamed, the storm was already gathering around him. For there were others who knew pieces of Sienna's truth, and each one carried enough knowledge to destroy her world. Matt was one of them. The man who once claimed to understand Sienna better than anyone else now looked at her with cold, analytical eyes. He knew what betrayal felt like. He had tasted it in the smallest gestures, the delayed phone calls, the subtle changes in her breathing when another man's name was mentioned. But the final blow came when he realized that the child she carried could not be his. That revelation did not merely wound him, it stripped him of his purpose. Rage took the place of reason, and paranoia twisted his thoughts into something unrecognizable. He became convinced that Noah was the father, that Sienna had chosen to replace him not out of love, but out of convenience, and that the only way to reclaim his dignity was to erase the man who had stolen it. In his mind, betrayal demanded blood. He followed Noah in the dark, convinced himself that vengeance would restore order. But when the gun was fired, and chaos exploded into the night, what none of them realized was that they were all victims of the same manipulation. Someone else had orchestrated the entire tragedy, pulling strings with quiet precision, watching them all fall apart from a distance. That someone was Holden. The name alone lingered in conversations like a rumor no one wanted to believe. He was the kind of man who moved between worlds, always present but never seen, always listening but rarely speaking. To the outsiders, he was a business associate, a consultant, a passing acquaintance. To Sienna, he was something far more dangerous. Their connection was wrapped in secrecy, formed during the moments she tried hardest to forget. He had power over her, not through affection, but through knowledge. He knew things about her, things she wished she could erase from existence. Every meeting with Holden was a dance with danger, a negotiation of survival disguised as intimacy. When the whispers began suggesting that he could be the father of her child, Sienna felt her world tilt. It wasn't just the fear of exposure, it was the recognition that maybe, deep down, the rumor was true. The nights blurred in her mind like smudged ink. There were fragments, his voice, his hand, the sound of her own sobbing mixed with the rain outside his apartment window. But nothing was clear enough to absolve her or to condemn him. The cruelest part of it all was that Noah believed in her innocence more than she did. He stood beside her, defending her against every accusation, refusing to see the cracks forming in the story she told. He thought the chaos around them was the work of jealous men, of misunderstanding, of a world that refused to let love survive. But every time he touched her, she flinched. Every time he spoke about the future, she felt the ground beneath her crumble. Because the secret inside her was not just about paternity, it was about manipulation, coercion, and fear. If Holden was indeed the father, then that meant the child was a living symbol of her captivity, a reminder of how powerless she had been to escape his reach. And Holden thrived on that. He had built his entire existence on controlling people through secrets, turning their vulnerabilities into his currency. He had a way of appearing at the exact moment when Sienna thought she was free, his voice a whisper reminding her of the night she could never undo. Each time she tried to move on, to claim her own life, he reminded her of what she owed him, and what he could take away. He never threatened her directly, he didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make her tremble. Now, as her pregnancy advanced and the truth loomed closer, he began to reappear in her world more frequently, calling at odd hours, sending cryptic messages, making her question whether any of the men around her truly cared about her, or if they were all pawns in his elaborate game. Meanwhile, the web of suspicion spread through Genoa City like a fever. Matt's attack on Noah didn't just wound bodies, it tore open old alliances and forced everyone to question what they thought they knew. Sharon tried to shield her son, Nick wanted answers, and the media turned the scandal into spectacle. Yet beneath all the noise, the truth remained elusive. Sienna's eyes carried guilt that no lie could hide. She moved through the days like a ghost, haunted by the possibility that her silence had caused a man's death and another's descent into madness. Every night, she would touch her stomach and whisper questions the child could never answer. Was it Noah's? Matt's? Holden's? Or was it the product of something darker, a plan she had never been aware of until it was too late? The irony was unbearable. All three men thought they were victims, but in truth, each was complicit in the destruction. Noah's blind devotion made him easy to deceive. Matt's obsession with control turned him into a weapon. Holden's hunger for dominance made him the unseen hand that shaped their downfall. And Sienna, the woman at the center of it all, was left with the unbearable realization that she had lost herself in trying to please them all. Love, betrayal, survival, they had blurred into one another until she could no longer tell which was which. As autumn settled over Genoa City, whispers began to circulate that Holden had left town, but those who knew him understood that men like him never truly left. They lingered in unseen corners, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Sienna's silence had become her prison once more, and Noah's forgiveness had become another form of denial. Deep down, he must have sensed it, that the child he would soon hold in his arms might not carry his blood. But love makes fools of even the strongest hearts. He clung to the story because the truth was too painful to bear. Matt, meanwhile, disappeared into the night, nursing his wounds and his hatred, convinced that justice had not yet been served. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the city's lights, Holden smiled, because for him, chaos was not the consequence but the reward. In the end, the secret that began with a single act of deception had become a contagion that infected everyone it touched. Sienna's confession might have set her free, but it also ensured that none of them would ever know peace again. The question of who fathered her child was no longer just about biology, it was about power, possession, and the terrible price of keeping love alive in a world built on lies. And as she stood by the window of her apartment, watching the rain fall like silver blades against the glass, she realized that no matter what the DNA test would say, the real truth was something she would carry alone forever. There are men who live in the light and men who thrive in the dark, and then there is Holden, who learned long ago how to bend both to his will. He was not simply a villain in Sienna's story, he was the author of it. Everything that had unfolded, the secrets, the betrayals, the blood spilled in the night, had been part of his silent design. What made Holden so terrifying was not his violence but his intelligence, the cold precision with which he dismantled people's lives and rearranged them to serve his own narrative. For years, he had studied those around him, found their weaknesses, and shaped them into instruments of his control. When Sienna met him, she thought she had found someone who understood her pain, but she did not realize she had walked into a carefully constructed trap. His affection was only a mask. Behind every gentle gesture, every whispered word, there was calculation. When he finally left her for Claire, it was not out of love, but necessity, the next step in his endless experiment of manipulation. Claire had once been innocent, a girl with a quiet heart and clear eyes, but Holden saw something in her that she didn't even see in herself, the potential for devotion so complete it could be turned into weaponized loyalty. He broke her down methodically, replacing her thoughts with his own, convincing her that the world was corrupt and that he alone could save her from it. By the time anyone noticed what had happened, Claire was no longer the same woman. Her voice carried his cadence, her eyes mirrored his detachment, her love for him was indistinguishable from obsession. She followed him into the shadows willingly, believing every lie he told her about purpose, destiny, and truth. And while the city whispered about Sienna's pregnancy and the scandal surrounding Noah and Matt, Holden had already moved on to his next creation, Claire, reborn as his disciple. For Sienna, abandonment was worse than betrayal. She had survived manipulation, humiliation, and fear, but nothing prepared her for the silence that followed when Holden disappeared. At first, she refused to believe it. She told herself he would return, that he simply needed time. But when she learned he was seen with Claire, when she realized the same man who had sworn to protect her was now repeating every poisonous pattern with another woman, the illusion shattered completely. The heartbreak did not come in one explosion of pain, it came in slow, suffocating waves, each one pulling her deeper into despair. She began to see herself as he saw her, a pawn, a vessel, something to be used and then discarded. Yet within that devastation, something else began to awaken rage, the kind that turns grief into purpose. Sienna's decision to speak was not sudden, it grew like fire under ice. For months, she had been terrified of Holden's reach, of what he might do if she exposed him. But the longer she remained silent, the more she realized that his power existed only because of her fear. The secret of the child, the truth of who its father really was, had become the weapon he used to control her. If she stripped him of that weapon, maybe he would finally bleed. The night she decided to tell Noah everything, she felt both liberated and doomed. She knew that once the words left her mouth, there would be no going back. The truth would not only destroy Holden but consume everyone involved. When Noah learned that the child he had claimed as his own was not his world cracked open. The betrayal stung, but what broke him was realizing how thoroughly they had all been manipulated. Matt, too, had lived under Holden's shadow, his hatred redirected, his actions twisted to serve another man's design. The revelation turned enemies into allies. For the first time, Noah and Matt found themselves standing on the same side, united not by forgiveness, but by the shared need for justice. They realized that Holden had not only stolen their lives, he had corrupted their very sense of truth. And there was only one way to end it. Holden, of course, anticipated this. Men like him always do. He had seen the shift in the air, the restlessness of those he once controlled. But arrogance was his blind spot. He believed that no one could touch him, that his intelligence made him untouchable, that emotion was a weakness reserved for others. He underestimated the power of collective rage, the kind that comes when love and loss collide. When Sienna went public with her confession, when she revealed not just the paternity of her child but the full extent of Holden's manipulation, the lies, the brainwashing, the violence, Genoa City trembled. Every face he had charmed turned against him, every favor he had bought crumbled into dust. Suddenly, the empire he built on fear began to collapse. Still, Holden did not run. He stayed, daring them to come for him, almost amused by their sudden courage. He welcomed confrontation as though it were theater, confident that he could talk his way out of anything. But this time, there were no words left to save him. Noah and Matt found him alone, sitting in the dim glow of his study, surrounded by the symbols of his deceit, the photographs, the files, the recordings of conversations he used to blackmail and manipulate. The air was heavy with the smell of betrayal and whiskey. For once, Holden looked almost human, tired even, but the glint in his eyes betrayed no remorse. He laughed when they entered, as though the entire ordeal was nothing more than an elaborate joke he had orchestrated for his own amusement. What happened next was not an act of justice, it was an act of release. The years of anger, humiliation, and pain found their outlet in that single moment. The confrontation was not cinematic, not filled with words or dramatic monologues, it was quiet, primal, inevitable. When the gunshot echoed through the house, it carried with it the weight of every life Holden had destroyed. And when his body fell, it was not just a man who died, it was the shadow that had loomed over them all. But the end of Holden did not bring peace. Sienna watched from afar as the news broke, her heart caught between relief and horror. She had wanted justice, but she had not anticipated the emptiness that followed. The man who had haunted her dreams was gone, yet the scars he left behind were too deep to heal. Claire, broken and disoriented, was found days later, wandering along the highway, murmuring his name as if he still whispered in her ear. Noah and Matt disappeared into the silence of their guilt, bound together by a crime that could never be spoken of. And Sienna, holding her newborn child, realized that even in death, Holden's legacy lived on, in the chaos he left behind, in the uncertainty that still clung to every life he touched. Some said he got what he deserved. Others said justice could never be that simple. But for Sienna, the question was never about punishment. It was about freedom. And as she looked down at her child, she wondered whether innocence could ever grow from a seed planted in corruption. The city moved on, as cities always do, but she knew the truth would linger like smoke, unseen, unavoidable, a reminder that evil does not vanish when its architect dies. It merely changes form, waiting for another name, another face, another story. Holden's death became legend, the kind whispered about in hushed tones, half myth and half memory. But those who had known him, who had lived through his cruelty, understood that he had never needed immortality, he had already written himself into their souls. And perhaps that was his final victory, that even in defeat, even in death, he remained unforgettable.